Hi, and welcome to Talking Philosophy. Today we're going to continue talking about the philosophy of the sons of Socrates. I want to emphasize that one of the reasons I want to look at these people so closely is that they shaped people's lives. Unlike modern philosophers who almost no one reads, and when they do, they don't usually draw all the implications out that the writer intended. The philosophies of antiquity meant to shape people's lives. As we saw last time, the great driving force behind Aristippus and the Cyrenaic movement was the search for pleasure. Today we're going to take a look at another of Socrates' students, Antisthenes, and his immediate student, Diogenes, and the school of Cynicism. Now, as I mentioned last time, Aristippus is either Socrates off 90 degrees, or else he's latched on to one tiny little sentence Socrates wrote about pleasure, or tiny remark Socrates made about pleasure during his studenthood, and made that into his whole philosophy. The school we're looking at today, the Cynics, they latched on to Socrates' description of himself at his apology. I think I mentioned it. I'm sure I mentioned it. I know I mentioned it. That Socrates described himself as a gadfly, someone who kept stinging the people of Athens so that they continued to follow the straight and narrow. And the Cynics took this to be central to philosophy, central to all their endeavors. There's more to them than just that, but this is central. Now, in order to be the gadfly, this meant their life had to be simple. It's hard to push others on their bad habits if you have a bunch of bad habits. It's hard to direct others to do generous things and good things if you're sitting around with a whole bunch of stuff in your pockets. So the Cynics adopted a very, very simple way of life. The Cynics owned a cloak. They carried a staff. Early on, they carried a cup and a bowl. But when Diogenes found a young man drinking from his hands, he got rid of his cup. And when he discovered another young man eating from a bowl made from a hollowed out loaf of bread, he got rid of his bowl. So this was the great symbol. Now, I've seen them described as being the symbol of Socrates, the cloak, because Socrates always dressed just in a cloak, and Hercules, the staff standing in for Hercules' club. These are later people. This is not a description that comes out of what little we have from Antisthenes and Diogenes. But I like them. I admit, I do like them. But we do know cloak, staff, that's it. And that's what they owned. The rest of the time they would spend in the streets criticizing the way people behaved, trying to bring them into line with common mores and decent behavior as they saw it. And that decent behavior, the decent behavior is ultimately modeled on a dog. Why the dog? Well, first, the dog is loyal. And the Cynics never give up. They hang in with whoever they try to help. And of course, they try to help everybody. How do they help? Well, like Diogenes put it, he says, a dog bites its enemies. I bite my friends in order to teach them. And what did they want to teach them? Well, most importantly, honesty. Everyone, I'm sure, has heard the famous line about Diogenes walking through the city carrying a lantern and being asked, "Why are you carrying a lantern during the day, Diogenes?" He says, "Oh, I'm looking for an honest man." If you're like me and didn't understand that for years, it means it's even in broad daylight, finding an honest man is so hard you have to have a lantern to help. And that's what was on his mind, and Antisthenes' mind, that people should be honest with one another, that people should be loyal to one another, that people should be decent to one another. Again, the story's told how Diogenes was found standing, talking to a statue. And someone said, Diogenes, why are you talking to a statue? And Diogenes' reply was, oh, so I can get into practice for dealing with asking you for help. It's interesting to note that Diogenes' most famous student, Crates, was a wealthy man who gave up everything he owned in order to become a Stoic. And indeed, you'd have to. As I say, the Stoic has to be simple, has to be beyond reproach, has to be someone who can speak to others from the life of the street, from the life of survival, from the most fundamental level of human existence. I don't know if we could have a world of cynics. I'm not certain that we'd survive if everyone was busy stinging each other, trying to get the other to see the right of way, and if they were all as honestly righteous as apparently Antisthenes and Diogenes and Crates and many of the early cynic figures were, then nobody would have anything to say to anybody else, and we'll all just sort of stand around going, well, I'm good, you good? Yeah, I'm good, you good? And that's not much of a life. Certainly not much of a philosophy. What's interesting is that both Diogenes and Antisthenes, and I think Crates too, although admittedly I haven't come across a direct reference, all seem to be at odds with Plato. Now, since Plato was Socrates' most famous student, the one who seems most in direct line of succession, at least the way he tells the story, why should they be at odds with him? Well, I think there's several reasons. One, Plato was rich. Plato hung with the rich people, stuck with the rich people, and he, of course, set up his school, the academy, and he took in rich students. And Antisthenes and Diogenes, at least, were not rich. Crates had been rich, but he was rich no longer because, again, simplicity is all. They also pick on Plato because they think he's a letdown to Socrates, that this was not the life Socrates meant for people to pursue, constantly studying, constantly being in school. Yes, it's true that the Cynics were continual students. Not only were they students of the mind, they were students of the body, always emphasizing the need for continued exercise and training. Diogenes, when he worked as a tutor, actually would teach his students how to defend themselves in combat, teach them survival skills in the wild. So it's a very practical term of philosophy, but it's not one like Plato's, which is, as I say, about sitting in a classroom. It's about living life. It's about applying the basic simple principles, whereas Socrates is writing all these big books and lecturing on them by the hour, and the students sit and think the deep thoughts and scratch their head and goes nowhere in terms of a way of life. And that's another point. The Cynics are all about the individual, how you need to live, how you should be. Yes, this benefits the society as a whole, the city as a whole, but that's not the point. Making better citizens makes for a better city, yes, but the important part is we're making better citizens. Plato, even his most profound statements on ethics, on human behavior, are made in the context of paralleling how human beings should be with how a state should be. It's always the big picture for Plato, who always comes from the top down, as opposed to the other sons of Socrates who come from the bottom up. All right, a couple of last defining remarks. Antisthenes was always ragging on Plato, and by extension anybody else, for their pride. He saw that Plato was overblown in his mind. On occasion, he found Plato throwing up. I don't know why. Apparently, old people threw up a lot in the old days, okay? So he found Plato throwing up, and he looks into the bowl where Plato is throwing up, and he says, well, Plato, I see a lot of bile, but I don't see any pride, so you've probably wasted your time. Also, Antisthenes chided people for their pursuit of pleasure. Obviously, he was looking at the Aristippus people, the Cynics. And he said, I would rather be sick than feel pleasure. Now, the Cynics didn't pursue pain. What's he trying to get at? Again, it's the distraction from the simplicity. Pleasure, it makes it harder to see the reality of life. I think we could do hours on that, couldn't we? But the important part here is that he had that saying that was largely associated with him. Now, gosh, the stories associated with Diogenes go on for days. I'm just going to remind you quickly the one about Alexander, where Alexander had come to Athens and asks to meet Diogenes. He's heard so many things about him. And they take Diogenes to where he lives on the street in a tub or in a barrel or in a large ceramic jar. It's not real clear which. All of these are told. Anyway, he goes to see Diogenes, who is living in some sort of on-the-street state of affairs, and he walks up and he says, Diogenes, you know who I am? And Diogenes looks up and said, yeah, you're Alexander. He says, you know I can do anything for you that you'd like me to do? And Diogenes goes, sure, sure. Well, Alexander asks, what would you like me to do? And Diogenes says, get out of my light. This is cynicism. This reminding Alexander that all the wealth of the world isn't going to make the sunlight any better, that all the power over humanity that Alexander has isn't going to make Diogenes as comfortable as having a nice ray of sunlight shining on his little tub. These were the Cynics. As I say, I don't know that we could have a genuine society of them, but the idea of a people inspired by these men to live simple lives, to look truth in the face and realize that all the luxuries don't buy happiness, all the luxuries don't save the day, that only honest hard work, only preparation and practice, only a life where you have the minimum you need to get by will serve to deal with all that life might hand us. So once again, we've been talking philosophy. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you'll come back and talk some more philosophy with me soon. Remember that I'm hoping people will subscribe over on YouTube if you're seeing this somewhere other than YouTube. I try to mount these on Patreon. I try to mount them on a Facebook page. It's easier to find the ones on the Facebook page and on Patreon because you can just search www.facebook.com/talkingphilosophy, all one word, and you'll find it. You can go to Patreon, search www.patreon.com/talkingphilosophy, and you'll find it. Can't do that on YouTube. We need 100 subscribers before they'll let me make that my URL. So please, if you'll go over and subscribe. Another thing I'd like to encourage people to think about is sharing this either on your Facebook timeline. Anytime you hear something here that's good, that you like, share it on your Facebook timeline. If you know somebody who will enjoy hearing this, send it to them in a tweet, send it to them in a message. And if not, well, then that's okay. As I say, I do this mostly for myself. Again, hope you'll come back, talk more philosophy with me soon. Until then, you keep talking philosophy. So long.